The routine for me is I get up at 5 in the morning and I go in and generally start out by reading several devotions, a little bit of scripture. What I like to do in that early part of that time is I'll sometimes meditate on great things that God has done. Secondly, I'll spend a few minutes every morning in thankfulness. And then I'll move into specific requests, almost always associated with people. Well, to be honest, if I don't have that time in the morning, I feel like I have missed out on something. You know, Jesus told us to take this one day at a time, and that's what I have found I need to do. And getting up in the morning and talking to Him provides that perspective that I need for this day.
Good morning. It's great to see everyone who's gathered today as we celebrate just a big weekend in the life of our church with all that's happened through Love Thy Neighbor and just the kind of overflow that we were experiencing with a lot of our partners in this, particularly Vigilant Hope, and some of the ways they were able to share that with other ministries who do so much for our cities and our region. So it's just a really, really powerful thing. If you were not aware of that, you might want to go back and check out some of the things that happened. And for those of you who were host sites and brought stuff, I know you have tons of stories to tell. We look forward to hearing them. We're wrapping up the series today called Behold, and I hope that it has been helpful to you. What I'm talking about in this particular series and really wrapping up today are some of the things that have most profoundly shaped my life. I am not naturally inclined. We hear Greg's story. He gets up at 5 in the morning, reads his Bible. Anybody like that? All right, perfect. So we see these guys who go, oh, that's for them. I know Greg. I know Greg's story. I know what he has done to arrange his life in this particular way. And the fruit of that exploration, the fruit of those disciplines get told in stories like that. And the reality is that those stories are actually waiting to be told in your life as well. A lot of us don't experience the things that we see other people experience in terms of their relationship and their walk with the Lord. Not because God isn't faithful, because we just don't have a way to pay attention, and we don't really arrange our lives in order for it to occur, in order for it to happen. These are things that God has promised, He's intended, He's called us into. And so I want for us to be able to think about or consider some things today as we talk about and wrap up this idea of behold, because it's not just about you complying, getting your behavior in compliance with some standards or rules or some system of morality that you think God expects of you. That's long been the position of the church. What I'm talking about here is for something to be awakened in you. Something that causes you to come alive and to give and to offer yourself in ways that you actually long to give yourself for. And so the question I want to begin with today is, can you control or do you have a say in what it is that you want, right? Can you change or shape what it is that you want? And just think about that for just a moment while I put some stuff up here. Because when you think about the things that you want, some of them are good, and some of them perhaps are not so good, right? And so, voila. And so, when you think about this, it's like, and what I'm not saying is all of us are born with certain dispositions, right? Some of you are inclined to be spreadsheet people, and then some of you are normal. I'm just kidding. And I'm just kidding. And some of you, you're inclined to like 80s music, and then there's other people as well. So there's all kinds of inclinations that we have that are created by context, all sorts of things. I'm not saying that. I'm just asking you, are you just a victim, or are you just supposed to live in subjection to the things, to the desires that creep up in you? The desires that you end up having. And a lot of these desires, if we're honest, these are the things that get us in trouble, the things that keep us stuck, the things that keep us from experiencing the kinds of lives that we are intended and created to live. So I have this annoying habit that I do with my family. Many of you guys know what this is. This is This is a universe controller is what this is. This is an Apple TV remote. It controls Netflix, it controls Disney Plus, anything that is worthwhile, it seems to be able to control. And so over quarantine, I'm sure we've all gotten, used to some binge watching, and we've got our shows, and we've got these series, and there's some great things. I'm actually working on a book that talks about this whole thing, because what happens is the beautiful thing about Netflix is when you finish the first episode. I remember the first episode I binge watched. I didn't intend to. I just sat down, and the first episode was pretty good. I was like, dude, that was really good. And then this little box pops up in the bottom corner, and it says, your show continues in 5, 4, 3, 2. And all of a sudden it's like 2 seasons later, man, you're still sitting on the couch. You're like, what has happened? So I had to get really disciplined in how I watch TV, or else you'll spend a whole week watching. I want to go to work. And so this allows you to do that. And so one of the things that happens is I try to watch TV intentionally, because I have such attention problems, I can get sucked into anything. So if I'm watching especially a movie or something that requires me to think about it, I have to pay really close attention to it. So what will inevitably happen is we're watching a show or watching TV, my wife will start talking to me. I pick up the remote control, I hit pause. And then I listen to what she has to say, and then I resume. So what has happened over the years, this has kind of morphed into something. My kids will walk in the room. They just walk in the room. And I pick up the remote control, and I go, pause. And I turn my gaze towards her. And she goes, why do you always do that? It's so annoying. And what she says is, I come in the room and you just think I'm gonna say something. I'm like, well, you are. So go ahead and tell me what you wanna say. And this is what they feel like. They feel like they are interrupting my show. But it's not what they're doing at all. What I am doing, what I've recognized, and this is, Michaela's gonna have a different take on this later on, but she's not telling you the truth. What I'm doing is I recognize that the things that entertain me, the things that grab my attention most easily, are not always the most important things, and value often doesn't drive where our attention goes. So what I'm doing is when my daughter walks in and my wife begins talking, I recognize, oh, there is something of value that is worth my attention. Pause so I can pay attention to what is happening. And because I can't do 2 things at once. Like, why don't you just leave the TV on? Because I'll either miss the show or I'll miss you. One of the 2 things is gonna happen. So I've learned. So here's how this works in your real life, not just in Netflix world or whatever, in your real life. There's something that has to happen between pause and between play. That you and I have to create a space or a way for us to stop doing the things that pull us and or naturally drawing our attention, and pause and do something. And in that moment, what you do is you pause, you stop something, you avert your eyes. It happens over here in the way you look and the way you see things, such that you begin to actually pay attention. This is what you are giving your attention to, and it comes at a price. It always comes at a price. For me, to stop what I'm doing, to attend to something else, means something has to give. And this is even more important, because what we've been talking about is the price of your attention is actually paid at the expense of your soul. What happens inside of you, this is where it gets paid, and what you fix your eyes on, what you're willing to give your attention to. And then we talked this, and what I've been trying to kind of badger you with for the last 4 weeks is that you are responsible for your own attention. You are not a victim of this or anything else. You're responsible. I follow people on purpose on Instagram and on social media, because I want to make sure that I'm giving attention to the things. I'm very careful about what and how I do that. I prepare myself to be on it. Otherwise, you'll just sit there and you scrub for hours. You're just like, ugh. It's a matter of what are we going to pay attention to. It has a price, a cost, and you are responsible for your attention. And the way we work, remember we talked this last week. The other thing is that we talked about, remember this from last week? That our thoughts, if you weren't here, you need to go watch this. But essentially, what happens is, I'd ask you to kind of do a survey or do an assessment of your reflex thoughts. And some of you were like, dag, I didn't realize I thought that bad. That's exactly why you do the exercise. Because most of us are stuck in stories that we haven't considered in a very long time. And the older you are, the longer it has been since you've actually considered the stories that are driving most of what you react and respond to in the world around you. Our brain gets so stuck so easily. You know this, right? Neurologists tell us this. They've studied this for the last couple of decades. Have been immensely profound in the understanding of neuroscience and what happens. And they've discovered that our brains are both far more, they call it neuroplasticity. They're far more elastic than we thought they were. They can be changed, but they also can get far more stuck. Our brains are extraordinarily efficient machines. Whatever your brain does not have to think about, it will not think about. This is true. This is why when you lose your keys, they are lost. The reason is because most of us, you put your keys in the exact same spot every single day, and you do this day in and day out. And what happens? Your brain stops thinking about it. It just does it. You just do it. So then what happens when you lose your keys? Your brain has absolutely no idea because it didn't think about where you put them. They just happen to be somewhere. This is how our brains work. And the more we do this, the more we get stuck. We get impatient. Right? We find ourselves growing impatient when Google doesn't guess the search we're going to put in. Because we're so used to it filling in the blanks for us, and our brain has realized this is a violation of my efficiency when I have to type 5 letters instead of 3. You should have known this 2 letters ago. We become intolerant of this. Why? Because these are the narratives, the stories, what we get used to. And what happens is you've got to grab this thought, and you've got to figure out what happens in this gap, because this is everything. And it really is that easy. Sorry, it really is that simple. It is extraordinarily difficult, but it is that simple. It's being able to grab this thought and hit the pause button and then pay attention. Then decide, is this a thought that's going to move you in the direction that you want? Is this going to begin to renew the things that need to be renewed and drive the things that need to be driven? Or is something else going to happen and you're going to finish the story based on what it is that happens in that first moment? And when I think about this, what I need to do is I need to sometimes, and I do this daily, and I think what Greg was talking about is you wake up in the morning, you hit the pause button before anything begins, and you pay attention, you fix your eyes, you set your minds on some things. And it prepares you not to resume the program, but to enter into it differently than you would have had you not hit the pause button. That's what we're talking about. Does it make sense? So this happens for some of you daily. I can assure you it will need to happen more often if you're going to find and experience the things that God actually has for you. So here's how I think about us. So what we see kind of derives everything else. It affects what goes into our minds. And so I think about it, the way I draw us is like this. And we're made up of our hearts, our minds, and our bodies. And the Bible is very clear in terms of how these things interact and what our responsibility is in them. And it teaches us very clearly that the heart, we've been looking at this from Proverbs chapter 4, is that the heart is to be guarded. Above everything else, guard your heart, for from it flows the well springs of life. Or everything else comes from your heart. Your heart is to be guarded above everything else. You are responsible for what affects your soul. Our body, the word that's used in most translations is the body is to be buffeted or beaten into submission, disciplined. I like the word rule or governed. The body is a beautiful servant. It is a terrible master. Your body almost never wants to do what is good for it. Laying on the couch and watching Netflix is the lowest, most base desire that we can fall into without doing anything. To get up and do things and move require us to exercise authority and will over what our bodies want to do. We all know this, right? The Bible talks about this as being the flesh. It drives a lot of things, but it is actually to be governed, to be ruled over, to be beaten into shape is really the way it's talked about. But it doesn't happen by force. It doesn't happen by force. This process begins when it says that we are transformed by renewing our mind. Our minds are to be renewed. And this is not just about switching thinking or the power of positive thinking. To renew something means that it is washed and it's purified, that things go in and out of it. It's filtered, constantly filtered. It's wrung out. It's wrestled out. It's a very aggressive thing to renew our minds. This is not sort of, well, I'll just think this thought and think about sunshine instead of thinking about dark clouds. It's you got to wring it out. You got to get in there and find out what you're thinking and why you're thinking, what's driving all these trains that make things so difficult, that keep us stuck. And so what I want to do today is I want to give you some practices, some help that might help you see this. Years ago, I was wrestling with this because when I thought about the mind, and I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, but everybody's probably had their mom, you were about to do something dumb when you were a kid, and your mom says, "Didn't God give you a brain?" And that means like you got to use your brain to stop doing whatever you're about to do. That's what they mean. And what we end up thinking, especially in Western culture, that our brains are really designed to leverage the efficiency that they have for an efficient life. And we end up thinking is that our brains are designed to gather information, compile that information, and then make the best decisions possible based on that information. That's what we think they are. So years ago, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I was doing a lot of research. I love neuroscience, mainly because it's kind of the galaxy in my head. And so I love that. But one of the things I was looking and researching is what is the mind for? What is it for? What's your brain for? And if you look up, and you can Google this, almost every system in your body, the digestive system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, all these systems, if you look them up on Wikipedia or wherever you look them up, it'll have a one-sentence job description. It'll say like the digestive system is to bring nutrients to all the cells of the body. The respiratory system is to oxygenate the blood, right? The circulatory system is to make sure that oxygen gets to all the parts of the body. Very clear, everybody understands that. Then you get to what's the function or what's the purpose of the brain. And it says it's the executive center for the body. That's helpful. It's supposed to execute. Go execute. What's the question that emerges? Execute what? Like, what is it supposed to do? And there's nothing written about it. So I began to say, it's nothing written about it. I can just make something up, right? It's half the fun. So I began to wrestle and say, God, what is this for? Like in 2 Corinthians, so we have the mind of Christ. There's this awakening of the Spirit and what happens in the mind. This whole idea that we are to renew, we are to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. So I began to wonder and muse, and perhaps the mind is actually designed by God to awaken the soul or the heart. What if the reason you were to use your mind was to see things and to process things in a way that you came alive? How different would the way you looked at the world and things and circumstances be? I think this is exactly the way it's intended when he says we are transformed by this renewing, by this gritty process by which our minds are harnessed to do something inside of us. Without stewarding our attention, this is why you've got to take responsibility for this. Without stewarding our attention, you will live at the mercy of whatever entertains you the easiest. And if you're like me, the things that entertain you the easiest are probably not the things that are best for you. They don't lead to health. They don't lead to wholeness. I read this past week on a blog post, and he describes what's happening in our world is that basically this is how he described it, a drenching malaise of binge-worthy TV, destructive news narratives, and body-shaming advertising that will slowly and ultimately kill you over time. That's the entertainment that is most likely grabbing and driving for your attention every single moment of the day. Everyone, without fail. If they can ping you in the middle of the night and get you to wake up and pay attention to something that will drive those narratives, they will do it, whoever they is. But we are not victims. We are responsible for what we pay attention to. The reason this is so important is that whatever captures your attention is eventually going to capture your affection. It is the things that you think and dwell on and see are not without effect. They are not without consequence. And last week I kind of introduced you to this life-altering reality is that you can actually think your thoughts. You can think your thoughts. So I want to look at this. How do we renew our minds, and what can we do, not so that we just comply or are better behaved, but so that something happens in here so that our minds are used to awaken something in us that we all want. So here's how the Bible talks about this. I'm gonna give you a couple passages just to look at this. And I want you to process this. If we were doing our quiet time together, suppose it's 5 a.m. We just got our coffee, we sat down and we're just sitting at the table. It's still dark outside, it's 5 a.m. We are feeling good because we are spiritual, we are up like Jesus was, and we're doing our quiet time together. Are you with me? And we read this verse, Colossians chapter 3. So we get our pen out. If then you have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above. Oh, I remember Mike talking about what we see matters. I'm going to underline, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds, there it is again. Mike's talked about that too. This is how we're doing our quiet time. Set your mind on the things that are above, not on the things that are on the earth. Okay, now I want to think about what I just read. Seek the things that are above. Now, get a picture in your head. When you're seeking the things that are above, what does it look like? Did you get it? Most of us just had a picture of like a throne and Jesus sitting on the throne. And then it very quickly goes into like streets of gold and singing Amazing Grace for 10,000 years. And because we're good Christians, we don't want to say it, but that sounds awful boring. So what? So you go, oh, God, thanks for that great quiet time. That was awesome. I did it. Check. And then we're on our day. But it says something really interesting. It says to seek the things that are above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Now, the picture of this is that Jesus is in this place of authority and he is seated. And this is really important because to be seated means that the work is finished. That's exactly what it would mean. It's how the priest would be perceived. When the priest sat down, the work was finished. What he has done, he has said, there is a thing that is already accomplished. There is a rule and a reign that is already completed. It is already done. It is already available. And I want you to set your minds on that kind of place. I want you to set your minds on a place in your life where God's rule and his reign is perfectly and freely and joyfully executed, where his will is done right here in your head, in your heart, as it is there. Do you see the connection? That's a much different picture than the streets of gold thing that you just can't get around. This is the language. We hear this thing about not on the things of the earth, but on those kinds of things. Romans 1, we just read this. Therefore, I urge you, I just talked about this. Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to set your sights, to look, to gaze on his mercy, his goodness, that he is for you. His loving kindness is directed towards you. Set your sights on that, to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God, for this is your true and your proper worship. And here we go again. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and then you will be able to test and approve what his will is, his good, his pleasing, and perfect will, to not conform to the patterns of this world. Do you know what the patterns of this world are? Like you got a picture of them, but do you know what they are? What it usually ends up being is like this list of things that feel so restrictive, and if you're really honest, they're the things that you really want. I'm not supposed to like money, I'm not supposed to like sex, I'm not supposed to like this, I'm not supposed to like that, and all these things are like here. And so you end up thinking like that somehow something's wrong with what you want. 1 John 1, little letter in the back of your Bible, doesn't make it any clearer. In fact, in some ways it makes it worse. Do not love the world or anything in the world. Don't love the world or anything in the world. There goes everything. Surfing, cars, things that I like, sports. And that could go from some people, but that's a different story. That's a message on idolatry, I'm just kidding. If anyone loves the world, love for the Father is not in them. Have you ever grown up, or maybe did you grow up thinking that what you do for a living that you actually enjoy and care about doesn't seem to matter to God because it seems to be in this category of things of the world? Does God care about real estate? Does he care about architecture? Does he care about design? Does he care about manufacturing? Does he care about making stuff? Like, I love architecture. I sat in small groups with people who were designers and did things, and they said, we don't feel like we do anything that matters to God. because it's like, do not love the world or anything in the world. We get these pictures in our head, right? And it continues a story that somehow we've got to do something to prove that we're really serious about God because everything in our lives doesn't seem to line up with that. Now, there's a thing, we did a whole series on this, I don't have time to get into that, but there's a thing that allows us the freedom. What it says is this: for everything in the world, the lust of the flesh, he's talking about a rule and a reign, a pattern. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life, it comes not from the Father, but from the world. There are patterns and drives in us that have nothing to do with what we do with our hands, but what happens in our hearts that cause us to do and pursue all these other things. If you pursue design or some of these things so you'll get attention for yourself and to create some deficiency, or it becomes your sense of value and worth, and yes, something becomes wrong with it, but to do it out of God's giftedness and call and vocation in your life becomes an act of worship to offer your bodies in view of his mercy. You need a category for this. You need to be able to think about this so that you understand that what you do actually matters to God and to his kingdom. He lists these three things off, right? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Then at the end he says that the world and its desires, these things are passing away, but the one who does the will of God lives forever. I just think this is so interesting because a lot of us have this idea that we're supposed to sort of suppress desire, and that is not the message of the Bible. Psalm 37:4, it says, most of us believe that it says, commit yourself to the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Just do it. It says delight. Delight yourself in the Lord. Feel this. Let something come alive in you. C.S. Lewis wrote a book called The Weight of Glory. It's actually a message that it was a radio broadcast. And he wrote it in a book. It's called The Weight of Glory. The second page is what he says. This is incredible. It would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling around with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy has been offered to us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. What if the patterns of this world, the things that draw you and drive you, are actually pull you so far less that the actual appetites and desires that you're made for just get squished. And you miss the things that you really want. We kind of have this idea of what this looks like. And we know that when we talk about patterns of the world and things of this earth, we're not talking about, or at least I want you to know, we're not talking about like the things that you do, the work of your hands. We're talking about the patterns that pull us. And most of us know those are not healthy patterns. Eugene Peterson takes one of these verses in Galatians. He paraphrases it, and it's a list of things that are the patterns of this world. I want you to listen how he describes it. Just listen to this. He said, it's obvious what kind of life develops out of this way of life. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex. A stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage. Frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness. Anybody see themselves in that? Trinket gods, magic show religion. You just have to have the latest, newest, coolest, whatever thing. Paranoid loneliness. When you're by yourself, you're so worried that your friends or other people are doing something that's fun and you are missing out. Cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, an impotence to love or to be loved. You can't even receive from someone. Small-minded and lopsided pursuits, the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival. Uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community, and he says, I could go on. This is the pull. This is the pull for every one of us. You realize we live in a hyper sexual culture. I mean, it is saturated without any regard for anything other than the appeal to make you think and feel certain ways, and it drives a narrative. It drives a narrative. For some of the men, right, you feel that it's an element of conquest or power or success or manhood, and for women it creates a pressure and a worth issues and all kinds of other things that just keep this cycle just viciously spinning out of control, one exchange to the next, until you sort of go off the cliff and a host of other things. For a lot of you in the next generation, this is kind of a newer phenomenon, but you've exchanged your identity for a brand. Everything is about how does this look or how is this portrayed. And this is the pull, this is the desire, this is the patterns that we're pulled into. We all know this. This is not condemning or knocking. This is to identify. These are the patterns of the world. You're going to end up making people your competition because you've got to be one step ahead of them. It's always going to be that way because that's the patterns that's the products that these patterns produce. Winning arguments, all these things are all rooted in this. But what if, suppose that instead of saying, well, I can't want these things. I can't want to be cool. I can't, want sex. I can't want to be successful. I can't want beautiful things or not. I can't want you have to just suppress all that. What if there was something else? What if it wasn't sex that you were after, but it were intimacy? What if what you were longing for was something far more deep and far more beautiful than what gets sold to us? And my question is, where or how is your attention going to be placed on that? Are there advertisements for that? There's a couple, not many. Most of it is like how hot she is, how hot he is, how romantic this is, it's all that. And that's where whatever gets your eyes is eventually going to get your heart. And my question is, have you thought about it? Have you really processed it? Have you created a way to make sure that what really you want actually gets a place to emerge, to be seen, to be felt? You're ambitious, your drive to think, what happens when you say, oh, when I get here, then I'll be able to do all these things. We miss all the opportunities along the way. And more than that, we miss the heart of generosity. We miss the heart to trust. We miss the heart to participate. There are all kinds of things that will emerge. And I could go on. I've got a list of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to list off, I'm going to give you 7 practices for you to pick from and to try. And this is one of the first times I've ever done this. I'm so excited. But a lot of what is contained in this message is not going to be given to you in this time. So you're like, whew, good, because it's almost lunchtime. We're going to record some stuff and then make it available to you over the next week. So you can pick one of these and then you can go and investigate it and research it and learn some more and then figure out how to practice it in your life. And it's very important that you understand that this is practice, right? Because none of us can do this yet. My kids do this. They used to do this all the time. They come home, they'd get a math problem, they'd do it one time. I can't do this. I'm like, right, that's why you need to practice, because you can't do it. The only reason you need to practice something is because you can't yet do it. So we're practicing this, right? It's going to be hard. It's going to be weird, but you got to practice this. So I've worked on this to try to understand some things that have been embedded in my life for a long time and tried to put it in some language that will maybe help you. And what more importantly is to help us so that spiritual disciplines are actually things that are given that you should do, like read your Bible, do your quiet time, pray this, whatever. So these are disciplines. These are practices of not doing things. We're going to not do something. And what we're going to do is we're going to not do something. We're going to create some space for something else to emerge. You got to hit the pause button. So you ready? Here's a list of 7. All you got to do is pick one. Pick one. First practice, the practice of not wanting. What? Can you do that? Not yet, but if you practice, you might find out something you did not know about yourself. What if you could practice, because this is what happens, we want this, and we want this, and we want this, and then our minds are just gone with all the things that we don't have. And all the things that we'll never have, and we can't figure out how we're ever going to get here because we can't get there. And what if we pick the wrong major? And oh my gosh, we're just off the rails. And just to stop. I'm just not going to want anything more than what's right here in this moment. What if contentment began to rise and you could breathe without the pressure? Right. Number one. Number two, the practice of not demanding. Some of you, your whole presence just puts pressure on everybody else. It's like when you text someone, you give them like 3 seconds. You're like, why didn't you text me back? They're like, oh my gosh. And we're just always demanding everything, and we do it just subtly. Some of us aren't as bad, like overt, but some of us are just really like, we're subtle. We just like manipulate things. We just get our way in other ways. And you don't know this at the pace that you currently run, and you only notice when you stop and you let something else emerge. Again, we're going to help you by providing some teaching and some exercises for this week. Practice. So you're just picking one. You can't pick them all. People after the first service are like, can we pick all of them? It's like, no, just one. We'll never do all of them. Number three, the practice of not having to have the last word. Boom. Some of you just can't help yourself. Because how can you stand letting that person be wrong? Your 14-year-old kid comes in, they say something, you say something back, they say something. That's it. Boom, gotta have. And then it's because they gotta have, they're just like you, that's why they have to have the last word too, so it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And someone's like, just let them be wrong for a while, it's okay. Like not having to have the last word. Number four, the practice of not second guessing. Some of you can't even enjoy being in a restaurant because you're worried that you might have had a better meal at another restaurant. Imagine, like, that's one thing in a restaurant. Imagine if it's your marriage. Like, what if you picked the wrong, there are 7 billion people in the world. You know what the odds of you picking the right one are? Do the math. But there's something else that has to emerge. Something else has to happen. We put all this pressure. We don't ever get to be alive. We don't ever get to feel this. You know, these things they'll rise up. These things will rise up if we create space for them to happen. We'll begin to see this. Number 5, the practice of not doing something productive. Now, if you're lazy, you cannot pick this one, okay? If you have a question, just ask someone who knows you. I'm just picking the practice of not doing something productive. This is awesome. That's been your whole life. That's a whole other thing. The practice of not doing something productive. Some of you, though, you can't even rest because you feel like something else needs to be done. You got to give yourself some space for that to go away. Number 6, the practice of not having to be somewhere. Some of you, you're addicted to a busy schedule. And it's always, I gotta be somewhere else. Some of you, this is your lot because you think that when you get somewhere other than where you are, you'll be more effective or you'll be this or you'll be that. You just gotta create some space to not have to be somewhere other than where you are. And then number 7 is the practice of not having to be somebody. Not having to prove your worth. Not having to build your resume or to prove or tell even God, here's what all things I've done, just to stop having to be somebody. And trust that you are. Do you see what begins to rise? So here's your homework, and then we're going to close with this kind of collective prayer together. The reason I've selected these is because my goal is not to get you to read your Bible more, although that would be good, or to give more, that would be fine. It's not to get you to do something, it's to get you to stop so that you can see something. God has promised that He is faithful to complete the work that He has done in you, and I don't want you to miss it because you don't stop to see it. So I'm gonna ask you, and this will all be printed for you and put out for you on our social media. But these are 3 questions. I want you to pick just one of the practices. If you're ambitious and you're like, I'm gonna pick them all, you need to pick number 5 of not having to do something productive. That's yours. I'm just gonna assign that to you. And I want you to think about these 3 things. Number 1 is what makes it hard for you to practice this particular not. You'll find some things about yourself that are a little bit difficult? Why is this so hard? Is it shame? Is it guilt? Is it fear? What is it? Number two, what drives your tendency to do the thing that you are working not to do? Why is it so hard for you? Or why do you always have to have the last word? Or why do you always have to be, right? You see what I'm saying? And then number three is, what do you begin to notice in this space that you've created? And I don't want you to be immediately afraid that you can't do this. Because what I believe is that God is sufficient to reveal those things to you. And not only is he sufficient, he wants to. He wants to. If we'll stop. The purpose of this is not to be a better person or more moral, but rather for something to be awakened in you. Something that may have long since been dormant, or perhaps some of you thought it's just dead. You haven't felt anything in a long time. So we're just going to stop. We're going to ask God to do that work, to awaken us to who he is. We might fix our eyes on him and see what we're made to see. That might be the way in which we get to be the way we are made to be. Father, thank you. In these next few moments, I just pray this will be some space to process, to think, but just to be for just a second. Just to ask you to awaken our souls to the things that you long for, the ways in which we've actually been created, and we indeed long for them. They've just long since been undermined because of the patterns that we live in. So we just fix our attention on you, believing that where we put our attention will gain our affection. So I just ask that you would meet us in this and lead us gently and firmly through this process over the next couple of weeks as we prepare for the end of this year. And so I ask these things in the name of your son, Jesus, who is our King.